At the White House, the letter lay quietly on the president's desk. Unlike the thousands of letters he received each day, it was not marked with red ink, not a report from high-ranking officials, nor a request from international leaders. It was just a piece of paper, simple and unadorned. Mr. President, I have something important to discuss. Not for me, but for those who have served in silence. Donald Trump read those words over and over again. A 28-year-old Navy captain was requesting a personal meeting with the president. This was unlike any request he had ever received, especially since the writer was not a senator, a general, or a diplomat. Trump picked up the letter, thought for a moment, then called his assistant, Marcus Hill, over. Marcus, do you know who Captain Ethan Caldwell is? Marcus nodded and walked over with a tablet in hand. Sir, Ethan Caldwell, 28 years old, graduated with honors from the Naval Academy, promoted after just 4 years. He commanded a unit at the age of 26, one of the youngest commanders in history. Trump leaned back in his chair, his eyes lighting up a little. Impressive. But is there a problem? Marcus hesitated, unsure if he should continue. 3 years ago, he made a battlefield decision that led to the death of some soldiers, including Lieutenant Sophia Carter, his subordinate. Trump frowned slightly. A young captain, who had made a wrong decision on the battlefield, requesting a personal meeting with the president. This was no small matter. He's still alive, right? Trump asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Yes, sir. But he lives with the haunting of that decision every day. And now, he wants to meet to discuss something important. Marcus replied. Trump didn't say anything more. He looked at the letter once again before setting it aside. Find out more about him. And prepare for this meeting. Whispers echoed through the White House hallways, speculating about the meeting. Unanswered questions, curiosity surrounding the young soldier who was requesting a meeting with the president. The door to the Oval Office opened, and Ethan stepped in. Light from the window cast sharp lines across his face, but it did not ease the tension in his heart. It wasn't because he lacked confidence, but because this was something greater than any battlefield he had ever faced. His heart pounded, but not out of fear. It was for one reason alone. He had to speak the truth. Ethan stood still in the room flooded with light, feeling the weight of the space around him. The White House, a place where decisions could change the fate of a nation, today brought him a sense of unfamiliarity and tension. He had stood before senior officers, commanded troops, and made life-or-death decisions on the battlefield. But today, facing the President of the United States, he could not help but feel smaller than ever before. Trump sat across from him, his sharp gaze observing him from top to bottom, as though evaluating every move of an unflipped card. The atmosphere between them was silent, no one spoke. Only the soft ticking of the clock filled the room. Your letter is very special, Trump finally spoke, breaking the silence. Is there something important I need to hear? Ethan took a deep breath. He had prepared for this moment, but no textbook could teach him how to face it. He wasn't a smooth talker, not someone who could easily find the words to express the pain inside. Mr. President, Ethan's voice was steady, though there was a strange feeling inside. I'm not here to talk about my victories or boast about the accomplishments I've achieved. I'm here to talk about things that few people are willing to acknowledge. About the price we, the soldiers, have to pay when we carry the burden of leadership. Trump watched him, still silent, but his gaze had shifted, no longer critical or doubtful. There was only curiosity and expectation. Ethan continued, undeterred by the gaze. 3 years ago, I stood in the midst of the battlefield, making a decision about a mission. It should have been a routine mission, nothing special. But I was wrong. Lieutenant Sophia Carter, who had always trusted my judgment, lost her life. Each word, each sentence Ethan spoke seemed to touch a deep pain within him. The images of Sophia, the moment she trusted him, now became an unbearable burden. It wasn't just the loss of a teammate. It was the loss of someone he had always considered his closest friend. Trump remained silent, his eyes never leaving Ethan. It wasn't pity, but understanding. He had met many people, from generals to world leaders, but he had never met a young soldier like Ethan. Someone who carried the weight of wrong decisions, someone ready to face his mistakes without shifting the blame onto anyone else. Are you still living with that pain? Trump asked, not to judge, but to understand. Ethan nodded, his voice softening, as if a part of him was breaking. Every day, Mr. President. Leadership is not about making the right decisions. Leadership is about bearing the cost of the mistakes we have made. And no one, but us, the leaders, has to live with those decisions. Trump smirked, as if he had understood something, but still didn't speak. He suddenly stood up and walked over to the window. The afternoon light poured in, casting a long beam across the floor. You came here to tell me about the burden of leadership? Trump asked again, his voice deeper. You think I don't understand? Ethan didn't answer immediately. These words weren't meant for the president, but for himself. Mr. President, I don't think you don't understand. But sometimes we need someone to stand up and speak the truth. Not just in the military, but for all those soldiers who have sacrificed, those who will never be mentioned, those who lived and died in silence. Trump turned back, his expression thoughtful. He had heard many stories from soldiers, but never one that made him pause like this. The room in the White House was silent. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the window crack could be heard. Ethan sat there, maintaining his calm, but in his heart, millions of questions echoed. This was not a regular meeting, nor was it a political conversation. He was not here to beg, nor to assert his place. He was here to speak about things that even soldiers themselves couldn't put into words. Trump stood at the window, his gaze never leaving the distant, cloudy skies. There was something in the air today that made him feel the weight of the atmosphere, not just because of political issues, but because of what Ethan was carrying. It wasn't an apology, but a heavy responsibility. We've lost many, haven't we? Trump turned, his gaze stern. The decisions you had to make, the price to pay. Ethan remained silent, but in his mind, everything seemed to shatter. Yes, it was a steep price. A price he had never truly come to terms with. No one teaches us how to face wrong decisions, Mr. President. No one told me there would be days when I couldn't wash away that haunting. The wind outside the window blew a little stronger, as if reflecting the tension in the room. Trump walked over to the desk, reaching for a pencil. He was not in a hurry, not immediately flipping through the papers in front of him. Instead, he looked at Ethan, with an attentive gaze. But what are you here to say? Do you want me to solve your problem? Trump asked, his voice unchanged. It still carried the sharpness that people often associate with those who have sat in this chair for too long. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling as though a weight was pressing on his chest. He could no longer live with this feeling. He had made a decision, even if it meant paying a price. Mr. President, I'm here to say that we, the soldiers, can't always keep our victories. Behind every victory, every medal, there's another story that no one knows. His voice grew steadier. We too make mistakes. Mistakes we have to live with every day. Trump remained silent, as if weighing each word Ethan spoke. But then, he suddenly spoke again, not to criticize, but to understand more clearly. What do you want me to do? Offer solutions? Policies? Trump put the pencil down, sitting up straight. You're not the first to make me think about this, but what you're saying is something else. Ethan looked into the president's eyes, not with fear or anxiety, but with determination. We need change, sir. We need real support. Not just the victories we boast about. There must be programs to support mental health for soldiers after the war is over. Trump sat still, contemplating, but there was something different in his expression. He had met hundreds, even thousands of people, but this was a different kind of soldier. A soldier who didn't come with eloquence or advice, but with the raw truth of the suffering he had to bear. Do you think I can change everything with just one decision? Trump asked, seriousness rising in his voice. Do you know how difficult it is to make decisions from my position? Ethan didn't stop looking into those eyes, eyes of someone who had once stood at the peak of power, but also faced unpredictable failures. I'm not asking you to change everything. I just want you to listen. Listen for those who no longer have the chance to speak. Trump stood up and walked to the window. The room fell back into silence, with only the sound of his footsteps echoing through the powerful room. So, you're here to tell me about the burden of leadership, about the things no one talks about? Trump finally turned back, his gaze still sharp. If you want me to understand, make me understand in some other way. You're not here just to tell a story. You're here to do something bigger. Ethan looked at the president, and for the first time throughout the meeting, he felt a shift in his heart. It was time, not just to talk about sacrifice, but to make others listen, to make them act. The room seemed to grow more and more cramped. Ethan couldn't tell if it was the tension or the gravity of the conversation that made the air feel suffocating. Trump's words echoed in his mind, like a challenge that forced him to confront a truth he had long tried to avoid. You want me to listen, you want me to understand, right? Trump sat back at the desk, his sharp gaze like a razor. Then, you will have to make me understand more clearly. You say leadership isn't about victories, but about the burden of mistakes. You say there are things that people can't see. But have you ever thought that in the decisions we make, there may be no right or wrong answer? Ethan felt the weight of every word. He had thought about his wrong decisions every day. And today, for the first time, he felt that the president carried a similar burden, though on a much larger scale. Leadership isn't about finding the perfect decision, Mr. President, Ethan said, his voice firm, even though his heart was full of conflict. Leadership is about living with that decision, whether right or wrong. And every leader carries their own burden, a burden no one else can share. Trump didn't rush to respond, his gaze still focused on Ethan, but there was a subtle shift in how he looked at him. It seemed like Trump was finding something familiar in Ethan's story, a feeling that he himself had experienced, though not in war. "So, what do you want me to do, Captain Caldwell?" Trump asked, not with mockery or doubt, but with genuine inquiry. "Do you want me to change the system? Change how people view the burden of leadership?" Ethan took a deep breath, feeling as though these words were being forced out from within. "Not to change everything, sir, but at least we need to start with small steps. Soldiers don't just fight on the battlefield. They fight within themselves, carrying burdens that no one sees and no one helps with." Trump said nothing, but what Ethan felt was not opposition, but empathy. He had been in this position, where every decision affected millions. But what Ethan was saying was an aspect Trump hadn't fully considered. "You know, Ethan," Trump said, his voice suddenly softening. "As president, I also face decisions I don't know are right. Every day, I have to make choices that could change the fate of the nation. And sometimes, I don't know if I've made the right choice." Ethan didn't say anything, just listened. In that moment, he felt the similarity between them, between a soldier and a leader, both carrying decisions that could change the lives of thousands. "So what do we do?" Ethan asked, his voice lowering. "We have to face losses no one understands, and find a way to keep going, to contribute. But what can we do to ease that burden?" Trump remained silent for a long while, as if contemplating the question carefully. Finally, he stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the space beyond, where the towering buildings of Washington reflected the faint light of the afternoon. "We can't change the past, Ethan," Trump said, his voice deep. "But we can change the future. You're not here to beg for forgiveness. You're here to do something bigger. Something you can see, something the soldiers you represent can see." Ethan nodded. He didn't need words of encouragement or understanding. He just needed a chance to speak the truth. A chance to make those soldiers who had sacrificed, those who had never been mentioned, be remembered. "Then go do it," Trump said, turning back to look at Ethan, his eyes gleaming with resolve. "If you truly want to make a change, don't just speak in this room. Go out there and tell the world." Ethan remained silent, but in his heart, everything became clear. He was ready, not to seek mercy, but to bring change. He would not let those silent soldiers suffer alone. Ethan stood up, his legs heavy, but not from fatigue, rather from a strange sensation. A sense of commitment, yet also filled with anxiety. Everything he had prepared for this meeting, the words he had organized in his head, now seemed insufficient to face the challenge Trump had just set before him. "Do you understand, Ethan?" Trump said, his gaze still sharp. "You're not just facing me. You're facing a system, a foundation of power that has existed for a long time. You think one word will change everything." Ethan looked directly into the president's eyes, no fear in his gaze, only a burning determination. He knew he wasn't just talking to a national leader. He was facing a system built over decades. But it was also that very system that had forgotten the soldiers, the sacrifices no one remembered. "One word isn't enough, sir," Ethan replied, his voice firm, without hesitation. "But without one word, who will know the truth? If no one stands up, soldiers like us will always remain shadows in the dark. I'm not here just to speak. I'm here to do something that I know I can do." Trump didn't respond immediately, his gaze still piercing and somewhat stern. In the prolonged silence, a palpable tension spread between them. "So, what do you want to do?" Trump asked, his voice cold, as if challenging Ethan. "You're here to change the lives of soldiers. But do you think a private meeting like this will be enough? You think just with powerful words, everything will change?" Ethan knew what he was about to face wasn't just this meeting. What Trump was alluding to was a greater challenge, a battle that not everyone could overcome. But Ethan had prepared for this. He had told himself that if he was going to do it, he would do it all the way. Not just for himself, but for all those who had sacrificed, those no one would ever mention. "Mr. President," Ethan said, keeping his eyes locked on Trump's. "I'm not here to do politics. I'm not here to seek fame or recognition. I'm here to speak the truth no one wants to hear. And I know that if I don't speak, no one will." Trump said nothing further. He remained silent, as if weighing every word Ethan had spoken. Yes, Ethan wasn't here to seek compromise. He didn't need the president's approval, but he needed a chance to do something meaningful, something that would ensure that all those lost soldiers would not be forgotten. Suddenly, Trump stood up and walked toward the window. A cold breeze from outside blew in, carrying the damp smell of an approaching rain. He looked out, his face immersed in thought. "You think one word will change this system, right?" Trump asked, but it wasn't a question to dismiss. It was a question meant to push Ethan further. "Then make others listen to you. Don't just stand here in this room and think everything will change. You can speak in front of me, but I want you to speak in front of the world." Trump's words shook Ethan. He hadn't prepared for this. A public confrontation? A speech before thousands of eyes, millions of eyes waiting for every word? "You want to talk about soldiers, about the burdens they carry, not just to me, but to the world. Go out there and let everyone know." Trump continued, his eyes cold, but with something like a challenge in them. "Don't just stand here with these lines. If you truly want change, make others listen." Ethan stood still. In his mind, a fire ignited. He hadn't come here to please anyone, nor to seek approval. He had come here for an ideal, and now he understood he would have to go farther than he had imagined. "We will change," Ethan whispered in his mind. "And I will be the first to stand up." Trump watched him for a long time, then finally nodded. "Well then, you've got your chance. Don't let me down." Ethan felt as though he was being swept into an unrelenting vortex. When the president issued the challenge, it wasn't just an opportunity. It was a pivotal crossroads in his life, a step forward that he could never reverse. Trump's words weren't just a push. They were a powerful test of everything Ethan had believed in. "You can't just stop at words, Ethan," Trump continued, his sharp eyes fixed on him. "To change something significant, it's not enough to speak in a private meeting. You need to make people listen. You have to stand on a stage, face the public, and show them the truth you're carrying. That's real leadership." Ethan took a deep breath. He had prepared for many things, but not for this challenge. The change Trump was suggesting wasn't just a decision made in a meeting. It was a confrontation with the world, a battle he had to win, not with weapons or strategy, but with his own truth. But this truth wasn't easy. Ethan wasn't just facing a president. He was confronting an entire system, an army, and a society accustomed to forgetting the burden soldiers carried. Ethan's story wasn't one told in boardrooms or official reports. It was a story most people didn't want to hear. He couldn't deny that resistance began to stir within him. He had always thought that speaking the truth was enough to change everything. But now, he understood that it wasn't that simple. A single word, no matter how powerful, couldn't change a system that had been in place for so long. "Do you think I can do this?" Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and challenging. "Do you think I can stand before the public and say everything I've carried in my heart all these years? I've carried that burden, and now you want me to bring it into the light." Trump didn't respond immediately. He looked out the window, where the afternoon light was gradually fading. Weak rays of light filtered through the panes of glass, casting long streaks of light across the floor. There was something in his silence that made Ethan feel as if some empathy was creeping into the room. But he still said nothing. Ethan continued, losing patience. "You don't know what that feels like. You don't know what it's like to stand before a family and tell them that their children won't be coming home. You're not the one who carries those wrong decisions, the ones you can never change. You don't know that feeling." Trump turned back to face him, his gaze no longer cold, but with something changed. He looked at Ethan as though he were finding a part of himself in Ethan's words. "You're right," he said, his tone softer. "I don't know what that feels like. But I know one thing. As a leader, we never have enough time to step back. We can't wait until everything is perfect. Decisions must be made immediately, and sometimes we don't know if they're right. But what's important is that we live with them." Ethan fell silent, feeling Trump's words slowly sinking into his mind. Even though Trump wasn't a soldier, he understood that every decision in leadership came with its price. But what left Ethan confused was whether he could truly accept the wrong decisions he had made. And if he couldn't accept them, what would he do with the burdens they carried? "You said there needs to be change," Trump continued. "So go do it. Don't just sit here and talk about it. If you truly want to make a change, make people listen. Ethan knew that Trump wasn't just talking about words. He was talking about action. A grand action, far beyond anything Ethan had prepared for. He hadn't come here to argue or seek compromise. He had come here to say something he felt responsible for saying. And if he had to face the world, then so be it. Then I will do it, Ethan said, his voice more determined than ever. Not for me, but for the soldiers who sacrificed. They deserve to be remembered. They can't die in silence. Trump looked at Ethan for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Then go and make everyone listen. In that moment, Ethan understood that what he was about to do wouldn't be easy. It would be a battle with himself and with society. But he was ready. He would not let the silent sacrifices be forgotten again. All morning, silence enveloped Ethan's hotel room. The light filtered through the window, casting long streaks on the floor, but in his heart, thoughts and worries still swirled, impossible to dispel. Today was the day of decision. After everything that had happened, there was no turning back. He wasn't just facing the president anymore, but an entire nation that was now waiting for him. A nation that, throughout his service, he never imagined he would stand at the center of the spotlight. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall. 10 o'clock. On the dot. What he hadn't expected was how strong the anxiety would feel. He had stood on battlefields, led his team through harsh trials, but standing in front of a crowd, with thousands of eyes staring at him, felt completely different. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, as if a bomb were exploding inside him. The door to the press room opened. A Secret Service agent pointed inside, signaling for Ethan to step in. His breath grew heavy, but he walked in, as though stepping onto a new battlefield. As he passed by rows of journalists, their eyes fixed on him, camera flashes flickering. He could hear whispers, questions spreading through the crowd. Captain Ethan Caldwell, what do you have to say about your decisions? One reporter asked, but no one answered. All eyes were on him. Ethan stood before the podium, adjusting the microphone. His hands trembled slightly, but he was ready. This was not an interview, not a series of soft questions. This was the moment he would have to speak the truth he had carried for 3 long years. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and began. Hello, everyone. I am not here to do politics. I am not here to apologize or to receive praise. I am here for one reason, to speak the truth. His voice rang out, firm, though still tinged with gravity. The room fell silent. Leadership isn't about just knowing how to win. Leadership is about bearing the decisions that we can't change, no matter how painful they are. Ethan continued. 3 years ago, I made a decision that cost a friend, a teammate, someone I trusted, her life. Lieutenant Sophia Carter, who followed me through countless battles, sacrificed her life because she believed in me. A whisper ran through the crowd. One reporter scribbled down every word, while others quietly stared at Ethan, none daring to interrupt. I am not standing here for you to feel pity for me. I don't need sympathy. I just want to say that leadership isn't about battlefield victories. It's about living with the wrong decisions and facing the consequences we can't change. His words flowed like a rushing river, clearing the tension in the air. Ethan looked directly at the reporters, unflinching. His eyes were full of resolve, undeterred by fear. The price he paid wasn't just for Sophia's sacrifice, but for everything he carried in his heart from the decisions he could never undo. No one of us can escape our mistakes, Ethan continued, his eyes never leaving the cameras. But what matters is that we live with them, we accept them, and we do what we can to ease that burden. He paused for a moment, feeling the weight of each word hitting those who were listening. The silence in the room felt heavy. His words weren't about celebrating victory or glorifying sacrifice in war. They were about the deep wounds soldiers carry within, wounds that society often forgets. I am here today, not to talk about myself, but about the soldiers who have sacrificed in silence. They don't have their names in the papers, they don't have medals pinned to their chests. But they sacrificed for this country. His voice no longer trembled as before, it had grown stronger, more confident. And I want to tell you that leadership isn't just about making the right decisions, it's about shouldering the wrong ones. We, the soldiers, are the ones who live with those decisions. And I want this society to recognize that. At this moment, a profound silence filled the room. No more questions were asked. Instead, there was quiet listening, an unprecedented stillness. It felt as though everyone in that room was feeling the truth Ethan had brought. When he finished his speech, Ethan didn't feel the relief he expected. Instead, he felt a new weight, one that he couldn't leave behind. But for the first time in many years, he felt that he no longer had to carry that burden alone. As he turned to leave, everyone in the room stood and applauded. Not because they pitied him, but because of the courage and truth he had brought. Ethan Caldwell, a young Navy captain, had made everyone stop and listen. The entire nation would never forget the words he spoke today.